should be live and streaming. Yes.
Welcome you all to the
Right?
We're
Still doing a couple of seconds.
Sorry.
There we go. Now I can hear.
now set to.
Thank you. Welcome you all to the Wednesday 28th meeting of the task force. Roll call. Howard Harrison.
Here.
Bill Moore here. Bill Sutton here. Brian Green here. Hawk here.
I'm here.
City Sun Wani. Cindy Gentler.
I'm here.
James Saunders. Here. Kim Cole. Pat.
I'm here.
Paul. Here. Sam Shogay. Sam Shogay. Tom Mason. Here. Tyler. Here. Great, thank you all. Before you all have the minutes of the Wednesday, July 14th, 2021 meeting. After your review, I'd entertain a motion to accept. Understanding that these minutes are now a more important part of our process, that they will be incorporated into our planning decision making.
I make a motion to accept.
Second.
I second. This is Cindy Genther.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We've all had the ground rules in front of us, but obviously we encourage open discussion, there are no right or wrongs. Speak freely per our updated process. Speak to your chair, so raise your hand or through the screen, put your hand up or do that. Please don't interrupt people. And don't talk among yourselves. And we'll get that on the page. And expect to go to short, sweet, and get on. And wait until when you all the line the phone, wait till your name is called before you unmute. Thanks for your consideration there. Under old business, Bill. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is the opportunity for anyone on the task force wants to bring up an issue from our last meeting to discuss further. We can do that as part of our agenda process. We promise that all the items from the previous agenda will appear under old business as a matter of protocol, so that can occur.
Do any members of the task force have any items they'd like to offer? Any suggestions, comments to them?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to hear last meeting. You have a question. How much pressure is there here in the county other than to have this more 1-2 person cutters more and about opposed to control for it times it's very intense. So I was just having just a question when others involved, I'm concerned about it. Something that falls just lit up and hung but
Okay.
what I can say right now.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else have any? All right, any comments from the public? Either online or in form? Hearing none, we'll move on to new business. Lot coverage standards. Thank you, Carl.
This
This
is
is
a,
um,
this
this is a request from the public that deals with a number of critical area provisions, and, for many of you, know that the critical area is 1,000 feet, all land within 1,000 feet of mean high tide, and that it is governed by state law. And the county implements, approved critical area program, which dictates much of what is or isn't allowed. And it contains, many provisions concerning lot coverage, septic systems, buffer protections, you name it, it's probably included in the critical area. And the critical area does have a model ordinance as a guide for us to implement the state regulations, and we can't be less restrictive than state law, but we can be more restrictive. And so a lot of the comments in this particular text change request are related to requirements found in the state law. So I'm just going to go through quickly. The first one is looking for an exception to including driveways as lot coverage. And unfortunately, you can't do anything about that. State law does define lot coverage, and it's pretty much any man-made material, roofs, pavers, gravel, sidewalks, and there are some exceptions that are noted in that definition, such as decks that have the ability for water to pass really don't count as lot coverage. Mulch paths within the buffer providing access to water don't count as lot coverage, but just about anything else does. And most properties have a 50% limit on the amount of lot coverage that they can have. Small parcels maybe are allowed a little more than percentage of the lot, but in general we think of it as being 50% lot coverage, and there are no exceptions for driveways, and it's up to the property owner to decide how he wants to use the amount of lot coverage that's available. So if
wants a long and wide driveway, then maybe the footprint of his
a
house
wide
is
driveway, then maybe the footprint of his house is small. If he wants a larger house, then he might make accommodations in his driveway.
Any
Any
questions
questions concerning lot coverage?
The next one,
The next one,
request
as part of this
item is
dealing with nitrogen reuse and septic systems.
this
This particular property owner built a very large house, and the health department required that he had a double-sized field. And again, those aren't regulations that are implemented through the land use ordinance, they are regulations that are implemented by the health department, so there's really nothing we can do. The third request dealt with the ability to remove fallen trees and debris from storms without exception. And again, the state law allows us to accept what are known as simplified forest clearing plans and buffer management plans following storm events. And on occasion, we have allowed landowners to kind of phone in a request, send us pictures, and move forward with getting cleanup. That happened particularly following the derecho. Or other large events where we're just flooded with phone calls, we do try to accommodate, let people clean up as quickly as possible. However, there are still potentially requirements for mitigation, and we follow up with the landowner afterwards. And state law does allow for true emergency situations to kind of for us to accept a buffer management plan after the fact. But again, the landowner still needs to make contact with us beforehand, and there really isn't anything we can do because it's implementing state law.
The
The next request deals.
Hold on, Paul, question.
This is about the double field. To explain double field, does that mean double the 10,000 square foot area that's required? Or is that just a double field that is designed for your house plan?
I'm not entirely sure because again, it is a health department regulation and we try not to step on their toes.
Yeah, but it certainly was over the
I believe that it was a double field within the 10, so that's not the 10,000 square foot septic reserve area, and they had to put in a double-sized field.
So that's my understanding with the 10,000 square foot. I just would like some clarification. That's my understanding of why you have 10,000 square feet, so you can put in that extra field. It means everybody's got an extra field. And
Well,
if you're
He
putting it
actually
here-
had to put it in.
Pardon?
He actually had to put, my understanding that he had to put in a larger than normal sized drain field
Okay, I can understand that. but-
for the size house he was building.
Yeah,
I don't think he had to do an additional septic reserve area for future
is it
redevelopment.
possible we could get that checked out? I'd be curious, because it might go to lot coverage, you might know that, especially smaller lots, it might impact. Instead of 10,000, maybe they got 20 or 15,000.
I will certainly check,
Just curious, that's all. Appreciate it.
It's my understanding that the health department bases their size of your drain field, whether it be a submerged drain field or a conventional drain field, or whether it's a mound system, is based solely upon the amount of bedrooms in the house. I think it's a confusing issue, that a lot of people believe that it's bathrooms. It doesn't have any, from my understanding and my involvement with it, it has nothing to do with bathrooms. It's solely the amount of bedrooms.
No, I fully understand that, but when they say double field, what I was going to ask.
Obviously, the guy, in my opinion, would say has a tremendous amount of bedrooms in the house.
Just curious.
I will look at the building permit, and see if I can find any information, but obviously what is in bold pipe, which was require nitrogen reducing systems for septic but not double field, is what this member of the public submitted to us without additional information. So I'll see what I can find, but, other questions?
Okay, thanks, Connor, go ahead.
So number 5 is lot line adjustments should be allowed for less than 5 acres if buyer and seller are agreed, and adjacent. I would point out that lot line adjustments are permitted so long as the adjustment doesn't create a non-conforming lot or make lots less non-conforming, and it complies with any other applicable county or state regulations. Again, in the critical area, there are specific laws that deal with the consolidation and reconfiguration of lots that might make it more difficult for some landowners to do it. It might be that it's fine with what our lot size and setback regulations are, but there could be something in state law that limits what somebody can do. And that can be true for kind of any development anywhere. If there is a particular state law that they can't meet, then even if it complies with zoning, we still wouldn't be able to approve it. Questions there? And then finally, this member of the public had concerns that farms, industrial, and government wastewater were not having to follow the same restrictions as private landholders in regards to runoff and wastewater management. And again, I would point out that all development has to comply with any applicable state laws. Obviously, what's applicable to farms or industrial or government wastewater may not be the same law that's applicable to a residential development in the critical area. But we would still make sure that any development does require or does comply with those state laws.
Thank you. Go
go ahead if you want to see your comments, go ahead.
So
I guess I was just sort of summing up by saying that, we implement a number of state mandated programs that require a minimum level of regulations, and that there really isn't much we can do to increase flexibility for our landowners. And that we are completing a review of the critical area regulations to make sure that what is in our land use ordinance will comply with the model state ordinance and state regulations. And as we move forward with presenting the document to you, we will make sure that you understand what those changes might be. And I would just point out that there are no specific text changes to implement based on this request.
Thank you for any members of the task force have any comments or questions? Any members of the public or any members that are on the live stream have any questions or comments? Very good, thank you, Carl. We'll move on to the allowing mountain bike offers in RCD campgrounds.
So this is another one of our needing to comply with critical area law. It's some of the background I provided to you, the definitions that are found in the model ordinance for buffer, modified buffer areas, and what they call a buffer yard. We had a request from the public to allow for modified buffer areas to be mapped in the Resource Conservation District for campgrounds as defined in section 2.2, number 18. So this is a very specific request. And then following with that, and allowing for modified buffers in the Resource Conservation District under the buffer standards in section 2.7b, number 3 for buffer, to add that the buffer restrictions do not apply to one water-dependent facilities that meet the criteria set forth below, or the new language, 2 campgrounds as defined in section 2.2, number 18. So this particular request has multiple parts. The first one is that establishing a process by which new modified buffer areas can be requested and mapped. When the county initially adopted its critical area program in the 1980s, modified buffers were not included. With our current land use ordinance, we did go through the process of having certain areas of the county, for example, Pitmore Park, Craig Neck, there are other areas along all the shoreline mapped as modified buffer areas, but we didn't include any kind of provision to let a landowner come in and apply for a new modified buffer area. So the critical area law does contain standards for mapping modified buffer areas, and I've listed those there in the report. Sort of the most one is that only lots of record as of December 1st, 1995 are eligible to be mapped, and that the parcel being considered to contain the buffers that was significantly impacted at the time of program adoption. So we gave you a link to Anne Arundel County within their critical area overlay section of their zoning ordinance has a process that establishes administrative review that lets the planning director do all the documentation and see if a proposal meets the requirements. And then Cabot County has simpler language which requires that revisions to the modified buffer areas follow the process used for other amendments to their official zoning map, which means that it goes before their county council. Again, the standards are the same as sort of what is found in the critical area law listed above. Any questions on kind of that first part of how we need to establish a new process for modified buffer areas? So then the second part of the request is including modified buffer provisions in the Resource Conservation District. Right now, I believe that the modified buffer is applied only to lands that's in critical area residential, marine, and potentially commercial critical area. So all of those are what are known as limited development areas, as opposed to our resource conservation district, which is a resource conservation area. So we've been talking with the Critical Area Commission probably over the last 2 years or so about how to address this particular situation. And the Critical Area Commission suggested that we consider language that is found in the commercial critical area and marine districts to address campgrounds. So it's a little more restrictive than the language that was presented by the request for a text change. But it does still allow for areas that would qualify to be modified buffer to have a 25-foot buffer instead of the 100-foot buffer. That's really what we're trying to do. It's areas that have lots of development that existed prior to 1985, so the buffer is not functioning as it's intended to do. It's not filtering any water and runoff, and so you can have these 25-foot buffers. It still has to be planted. It's still sort of a no encroachment zone, but it's a little less restrictive than the standard 100-foot buffer. So as I noted in my recommendation, we do support adding a process for property owners to request designation as a modified buffer area, and we do support adding modified buffer language to the Resource Conservation District, but we would suggest following what the Critical Area Commission recommended as opposed to what the requester submitted. And no matter what, we still have to meet the minimum requirements of the critical area law.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the task force?
I think it would be, I hate this, but I think it would be helpful for people to put this in a real life case scenario so that people understand what you're speaking about in general, the public. And I think that's why we might not be getting as much feedback because from everybody else, because people have no idea what all this means. And so I don't have the answer for that, but maybe a visual graphic of what you can do within whatever buffer area it is, so that people can see what it is. This is just Greek language to so many people, and unless you go through it, like somebody like Joe or me or whoever might be this in their day-to-day work, nobody has any idea what we're even talking about. They don't understand what it is until they have the scenario to them. And I think that's one of our biggest issues in dealing with this sort of stuff and where they resistance from people when they want to do something. They don't understand what it is they have to go through in order to do. So I don't know how we improve upon that, because I think we're here to serve the general public, and before they come in here and find out all these rules and regulations, somehow there's a visual thing for somebody to look at and say, okay, this is what you do in this situation, this is what you do in that situation.
I wish it was that simple.
I know, but it's just that people come back to me and say, wow, I never had any idea.
I understand. And that is one of the issues with trying to implement state law that is meant to apply to any location in the state, or in this particular case, that has shoreline on the Chesapeake Bay. And it is law that was established in 1985, became effective in December 1st, 1985. And it's evolved over the years as situations have come up. Our implementation of it has evolved over the years from obviously in 1989, but that zoning ordinance was very strict. Over the intervening years, we realized, maybe there are places, particularly Kentmore Park, is a perfect example of cottages that were developed on small lots in the 1930s and 40s. They existed prior to critical area law, but people still need the ability to come in and redevelop those parcels or, make additions or alterations to those houses. And so that's where we now can apply the modified buffer. And I totally agree with you. Each time I read it, I feel like it's a different interpretation, and I've been dealing with it for 20 plus years. And unfortunately, even with that, again, the state law continues to change. And so what we were implementing 20 years ago was impervious surface, and gravel driveways didn't count. And now it's lot coverage, and gravel driveways do count. Or the interpretation of how debts count keeps changing. And I wish it was easy to let people understand. We're doing our best by trying to make sure we understand so we can inform property owners, inform realtors, inform you. And I learn something every day.
It's very difficult to give somebody an idea, like in my line of work, where you're out there in the field showing somebody a piece of property, and they say, well, this is a waterfront property, but I can't see the water. And it's like, what do you tell them? And I mean, I know at one point there used to be, you can cut off dead, dying, living trees. And now I don't think that's so much so. I think that some sort of guidelines have to be given to people in short form, or access to that short form, so that when people ask the question, there's like a question and answer script. I think would help tremendously for our county to have something like that available. So.
When I will say that when those kinds of questions come up, a lot of times we refer people to the Critical Area Commission webpage. There is the document that they published a number of years ago called the Backyard Guide to the Buffer, or the Green Book. There are a couple of other publications like that. There are some a series of frequently asked questions that answer some of this information. And I would hesitate to probably put better links on our webpage to the Critical Area Commission, but I would not want to copy and just kind of publish that information, because if they make a change and we don't know about it, then it's going to be misinformation for our landowners, which is what we're trying to avoid. So like I said, I can certainly, I think the Green Book is available on our website. But I'm not sure if like the link to the frequently asked questions, we can take a look at making some of that information more accessible. I will say, as soon as I can find some time, I want to do some work on some of the forms that we use for forest clearing, for buffer enhancement, buffer mitigation, because they're slightly intertwined, and if I'm having trouble understanding them, then I know you are, and a regular citizen is. So we're going to try to gather examples from other counties and see how we can make it easier for everybody to understand. And if you, or anybody else, if you have come across a situation that you feel like you really need to make sure we are making clear, or there's a question that comes up multiple times and we want to make sure we have an answer, please let me know.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Was the campground, the way this is designed for, there's a resignation to use the state critical area idea, was there a specific reason a campground would ask for this? What was the need?
Well, we have a campground in the county that has been in existence since 1971 or 72, I think. That has a lot of development that's pushed right up against the waterfront. And they are trying to make some improvements, trying to do some expansion. And one of the things they need is a modified buffer area to help them move forward with their plans. So, and that's what I'm trying to point out, that this is allowing this isn't going to help everybody in the county. It's not going to help the cottage on the waterfront farm that sits 50 feet in the water, because in essence that buffer is probably still functioning, except maybe the 50 feet or so right in front of where the cottage is. But
if
if
this
this
case,
case, and
there could
be some others
that
aren't in the Resource Conservation District, but maybe are in the Critical Area Residential District, that we didn't previously map, but those property owners should be given the opportunity to come before us and present their evidence to say, look, I didn't have a functioning buffer in 1985, can I be designated so that, again, I can make improvements in my property. I can think of at least one other business location in the county that could benefit from having a process whereby either the planning director or the county commissioners would approve modified buffer areas.
It sounds like a tremendous amount of work that we started. I mean, really.
I don't think so, because the burden of proof is on the applicant to prove to us that, hey, it didn't function in 1985. And you do that through looking at old aerial photos or dating the structures that are on the property. And I think for us, depending on how we do it, an administrative process would certainly be easier. It would be kind of like doing our administrative variances or special exceptions. So an application is submitted, we review it to make sure it meets whatever standards are in our ordinance, and then we hold a hearing. For critical area stuff, it still then has to be submitted onto the Critical Area Commission for their review and approval, so it might take some time. But I don't think that it would be an overwhelming amount of work for the planning department.
Still, I saw you moved to the table. You have a comment on that. I guess I just wanted to tease out a possible instance and ask the task force. From what I'm hearing, are you interested in seeing graphics in the code related to some of these items, or was that not the intention?
I would too. Pictures for the council.
I think we discussed that earlier on too, didn't we, in the very beginning, when we were looking at the consult that we had did something, or we didn't discuss some of that?
We have graphics related to setback, etc., but not necessarily critical.
I think it would help.
Thank you.
I definitely agree with that as well.
We'll see if we can find anything that would pass muster for Critical Area Commission. And I say that only because I really feel that in so many instances, it is on a case-by-case basis. What applies to this property, there might be something just a little different, two properties down, and the graphic could be misleading. And we definitely don't want that. But we can certainly look to see what we can find.
Any other comments from the task force? How about from our public online? And then in person, please come and state your name and date.
Jenna Richardson, Lewis, Kent County, Millington. I have a question. We're trying to protect our waters, and we have 100-foot buffers to do that, and then we have non-functioning buffers that people want to apply for so that they can do improvements within the 100-foot buffer. Why is it that we're not requiring them to at least do some sort of upgrade to the small buffer that they have before they can do any kind of, if we're gonna give them a modified buffer, why aren't we then insisting that we at least get something in there that helps to protect the water better before they can?
Oh, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, there are standards that critical area law requires. I think they recommend that, like, for commercial, industrial, institutional, recreational locations, that first development or redevelopment be located as far as possible from mean high tide, even if it is a modified buffer area. You can't locate new development any closer than what existing development is. There are generally restrictions and requirements that mitigation be provided so that that 25-foot strip would have to be kind of fully vegetated, and if it is already fully vegetated, then they have to plant vegetation elsewhere on the property. So it's not just a carte blanche granting of no buffer.
And what is the density requirement for the mitigation? And also, what is the density requirement of the existing? If there's an existing, what's the density? And if it's not, and they have to plant it, what is the density requirement?
You mean what is the mitigation ratio for new planting?
No,
Or
if they already have a semi-vegetative buffer, what is the density that that buffer has to have to meet the minimum requirements? And if it doesn't meet that, what kind of reforestation do they have to do to that buffer?
I would have to do additional research. I mean, I've got some of that in front of me, but I haven't read it carefully enough to know exactly how it is implemented. And so I don't want to give false information. Other than, I will say that currently our standard for expansion of existing zoning and modified buffer areas requires a 3-to-1 planting mitigation. So for each square foot of additional lot coverage that you put in the buffer, you have to plant 3 times the square foot. And what you plant, there are very, it can vary from, there are sort of credits assigned to the types of planting. So like a 2-inch caliper tree gets you 200 square feet of planting, whereas a small shrub might get you 10 square feet. So you can, based on the square footage, you put together the combination of plantings that you're going to do.
But they're allowed to do that on other areas of the property and not necessarily in the buffers. They don't necessarily have to do that within, am I understanding that correctly? Are you talking about that they have to have the mitigation somewhere on the property?
No, the first location has to be in the buffer. If the buffer is established and there's no additional room to plant, then they have to plant outside the buffer. And if they still can't plant outside the buffer, then for some reason, they have to pay a fee. So you don't just get away with not doing anything.
No, I didn't think that, but obviously where we want the most buffering happening is where they're doing the construction and also close, for filtration for the water. So,
and I guess I would say that that's sort of the way that some of that's mitigated is the fact that you can't go closer to the water. That's sort of, generally it's, our current ordinance says the average setback of the neighboring properties. So you can't just have a buffer modified, and I'm going to expand my house out until it's 25 feet from the river. There are certain limits and standards that have to be met. If they can't be met, then the applicant would try to apply for a variance. That then tacks on even more mitigation. So.
Okay. I just want to, it seems like you've got these modified buffers that are kind of non-compliant. And now we're trying to make it so that people can apply for more modified buffers. And it's kind of like, if we're going to have them, I understand that they have to be there because if something was already existing, you can't have somebody tear it down. But I just want to ensure that we realize that putting in the buffer to protect the water is what we're shooting for. And it's not clear to me that that's actually has to be done, but it sounds like there is some safeguards in there.
Yes.
As long as people don't say, well, I can't plant there.
There are safeguards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience speak to this issue? Or can you state your name for the tape, please?
Sure, I'm Annie Richards. I'm a Chestnut River teacher with Shore Rivers. was on Bryce's Mill Road. I have a couple of thoughts on the buffer zones as well, and I hope that this comment, even though I'm jumping ahead in the agenda, it ties together with, I see that there's talk of resiliency later tonight, and incorporating future land uses in combating sea level rise and climate change. And marsh migration and this kind of buffer zone that we see so much on the Chester River, the Sassafras River, and along the Chesapeake Bay is critical natural area that is going to allow our landowner homes to stay resilient through sea level rise. And having that buffer zone large enough for marshland to recede into people's properties and then flow again as storms, major rain events, and sea level rise will undoubtedly shift land, will be something that will be important to consider for protecting homes as much as protecting the river. And so as the task force considers how they tackle buffer areas within the critical area, they may want to consider resiliency and how it's going to affect parcels of land and how they protect buffer areas. The state, I heard Carlos say earlier, the state has mandated minimum expectations, and county can strengthen those expectations and go higher than what the state of Maryland allows because of the low-lying nature of so much of our county and how much critical areas we have. I think that would be a strong and wise thing for the task force to consider when they're looking at critical area regulations. And not to mention, protecting those critical areas is part of, protecting and showcasing our rural landscape and the natural resources we have as part of our comprehensive plan. So I would just also consider that precedent can be a dangerous thing, especially in looking at an island. And I've seen what developing areas in getting variances for restricted buffer areas has done year after year. If a property is next to a property that has gotten, a reduced buffer for commercial purposes, then, 10, 20 years down the road, there's enough neighboring businesses that are next to that then get grouped into a high density area and zones get changed. And Kent Island lost a significant amount of their marshland and essentially has no transitional marshland to absorb impervious surface runoff. And so while I think that King County as a whole is a very long way off from the situations that are facing Kent Island, I think that conversations like this about the critical area are important to have now so that we can avoid a slippery slope that can lead to the development that has happened and the marsh loss that has happened on Kent Island. Thank you.
Anyone else out in the audience or on the live stream? Thank you, Carla. Thank you. Ready to move on?
I guess we have consensus thoughts on how you'd like for us to proceed. This, I mean, you follow our recommendation. We have the request for graphics.
I guess I like the idea that we follow state law that will impact use here, but I do question that. That's what I asked about the kind of work is how much interest you have now in remapping modified buffers in general.
I know of one other property that has spoken to us. There could be others if this change occurs. And I don't know if they would all apply. I think there's some language in here that it has to already, you're basically expanding your modified buffer area. So it's properties that are already adjacent to modified buffer can be added, but it's not like we're gonna have this property here and a property there, except for maybe kind of this one particular place.
task force, or thoughts on, or we have testimony from the public that seems to indicate that there's a great interest in at least being stronger than, at least offering stronger regulations than the critical area requires. And how anyone else in this task force. You're right.
I would just like to make one comment. I don't want to see that we make it easy for people to make changes, and particularly in the buffers, close in a modified buffer area, because it seems to me the modified buffer with the 25-foot setback from the water is not very, very far. I don't want to make it inviting so that we have lots of people wanting to make that change, particularly in light of the high water coming in the next, when we get further on in our discussions tonight, where we see the reports that, tides are going to go higher, storms are going to be more fierce, things like that. And we don't want to lose any of our buffer by having development move forward, move closer to the water. So I don't want it to be too inviting.
I don't think it, ultimately, I don't think it will be, because 20 years ago when we mapped buffer modified areas, we tried to capture all of those neighborhoods, that have sort of that pre-existing development condition. But we probably, I think a few have come up over the years where we've had to say, look, you have to come get a buffer variance. And even those few, I'm really not sure that they could meet the standard of non-functioning buffer in 1985. So that's just yeah.
I'm not so sure that anybody understands what we're even talking about. To be honest with you. I mean, whether we're making it more stringent or less stringent or something, I don't think anybody really understands until they go in and see you with a project, or if the planning commission with a project, they have no idea what is entailed and what's involved with it. So my only suggestion is, in some way, we have a simplified piece of paper that says this is what you can expect if you buy a piece of waterfront property, and what you might be faced with. In the situation now, I know I don't answer many questions because I don't want to be liable for it. I want to go see them, and by the time you go see them, being the planning commission, in my case, as a real estate broker, half the time somebody else has already bought the property. So it's got to be something that is simplified. I'm not saying that we allow everybody to build within 10 feet of the water or not, but if I'm selling a piece of property to somebody and they ask me a question, I should be able to field that question with some sort of certainty. And I don't think anybody in this room can field that question with any kind of certainty, except for maybe you, Carl. So I think that's an issue that we have to improve upon within our ordinance of some sort, or if it's not in the ordinance somehow, then it has to be something that the county can, a supervisor under council. That's my thoughts.
Any thoughts to the, I think, our third keeper Amy brought up the comp plan and our respect for our natural resources. And I guess that's the question to me is, do we want, for the comp plan, is there interest in strengthening the critical area to what we have now is slightly stronger than the critical area in some cases has been? Is that an interest? That's what I mean. I understand that you're talking about specific questions, which are all perfect. I'm just talking about the attitude for the land use ordinance. Should it offer, what's our opinion here? Is it strengthen? Should we offer more to show our concern that we don't look like a Kent Island or other areas of the development? That's just a question for the committee to think.
I think if we're already stronger than what the state mandates, then we're fine where we are. Personally, I don't think we need to get any more stringent than what we have in place today. From my experience of dealing with all of this, so.
And you can certainly think about this over the next 2 weeks, and you can kind of tell us what your feelings are when we do old business at the next meeting. And because if there are other questions that come up while you think about it, just reach out and see how we can answer them.
No, we're right here, James.
From what I'm listening to, I'm trying to figure out, how long has the county had this buffer set at, 25 feet?
The critical area became effective on December 1st, 1985. And I'm not 100% certain exactly when Kent County adopted the program, but I know it was no later than August 1st, 1989. So we've had all of this in place at least then.
Okay, so has the county found any faults with this buffer being set at that footage?
I would say that we have, which is why in 2002, we went through the process with the Planning Commission and that task force to actually map buffer modified areas. Because we didn't have any provision for it before. And so now in the intervening 20 years, we realized, well, okay, it's great that we mapped those areas in 2002 and had them approved, but maybe we need to allow a mechanism for a landowner to come in and apply for a property that we missed. We don't have any mechanism that allows property owner to seek this designation. And so that's really what we're asking for is, do you want to include the opportunity for a property owner to seek designation as a modified buffer area? I don't really think, ultimately, I don't think they're going to be any dispute. I don't think they're going to qualify. It's a hard test to actually meet the criteria and be designated. And it has to be approved by the county, it has to be approved by the Critical Area Commission. And it's not something that somebody will do lightly, but I think it's important that we have the ability, if a case arises, that either meets a desired economic development goal of the county. That's sort of what this campground provision supports, some of our desire to have tourist amenities. One of the other things I can think of is also another commercially used property. And again, so it's we're playing that balancing act of economic development versus preservation, and we're just talking about adding a tool to our toolbox if the case arises.
Let's back up. Explain this to me. If a family came in and approached you and want to build, what and what their buffer is now, what would you explain to them if they wanted to build on your old process that you have right now? What is it, 25 feet?
No, it's 100.
100 feet. Okay.
In a couple of areas, and there's a few vacant infill lots that we can allow houses to be built that are no closer than the average of the neighboring properties. So if the two houses on either side are at 75 feet, then that's as close as an infill house can be built.
Okay.
So
that's what I wanted to know. All right. That's my question.
So I think that's what the confusion is. What she's talking about one thing, about a modified 25-foot buffer for the water.
Right.
New construction in the critical area is a 100-foot buffer. So you can't build anything on new construction unless it's the exception Carla just mentioned.
Right.
Within 100 feet of the water.
Yeah, but she also said if a house is sitting there at 75 feet, and then I want to come in and between them two houses, build another house, would I have to be set back 100
That's
feet?
the exception.
Well,
That's the exception.
it depends on where it's located.
That's
What I say. We have certain areas that we have already established don't have functioning buffers. Kenmore Park is a perfect example.
Okay.
Huntingfield Estates are all Tallchester. Are perfect examples where you might be able to do infill development at less than 100 feet.
Okay.
But if you were to see the map, and I don't think I have it with me. If anybody's curious, let me know and I'll get it to you. You can see that it's very specific areas that are currently buffer modified. Anywhere else is, the buffer is going to be a minimum of 100 feet. And there are certain site conditions, just add more confusion, that might expand that buffer.
Okay.
Got
I don't think about building a house there.
But you gotta pay a lot of money for it.
Right.
Taxes are high.
Thank you, Carl. That's all. Yeah, I'll make sure you're wrong. Yes, at 7 o'clock, though, I think there's a deadline to take this point on to get back. But, it's 10 minutes ago, everyone stand up and stretch. If you can get back here at 7:10.
And just as a reminder, it's 25.
Joe or Carla, we have an echo in the public recording, and maybe now's a good time we can try to see what is the source of that.
I can't see here. Are all the slides being used?
The telephone that's not giving.
Yeah, there's a 5, 7, 1.
It's not interference, it's that when everyone talks, there is an echo. And I'm wondering if we don't have a double screen up or in some fashion that's doing that. On the Teams broadcast, it's clear. It's just on the YouTube channel, everyone's voice is echoed.
I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, before I have not seen the county commissioner's hearing room up on the participants list, so I wonder if that might be where the problem is.
No, that's the only way we can do Teams.
Okay.
We're always up.
Nicely explained, Carl. You've explained it to me that same way multiple times. I mean, you would have a condition that you want to expand it. I mean, I know it's like, Yeah. Yeah, and I can see why. I mean, they want to put a pool in, they want to redo the pool, but they can't do anything to that property right now, really. Like, and their house is a problem, and I'd rather have it get it compliant. And then, like, I was thinking in Kitchen's Landing, there's a couple that are right on the edge. Like, that their house is right here, this house can do it, this house can't. Yeah, for whatever reason. Yeah, yeah, because there was one that I remember when he came, I was like, oh, thank God, your house is able to do this, but the other ones are not. Yes, I was just looking at it. Oh, okay. Yeah. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Yep. It's growing. Okay, yeah, I'll read it. Just a change. Oh, you did? Okay. I think it's fine. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. But I think that honestly, it's the way the whole state's going. And I think that's the forward thinking and very minimal. Honestly, like, I don't think that overall it adds a significant amount. It's a layer of cinder block. Yeah. I mean, I've dealt with it enough, and I was doing it for a while, and I understand the reasoning behind it. So if there's no reason, I can't speak to it. As long as somebody doesn't start attacking me about it.
I didn't warn you, so.
No, it's fine. I mean, I've dealt with it enough. Yeah.
Why am I missing it?
Yeah, no, the reason that I had some apprehension is I picked up my daughter, and she was, my daycare lady was sitting on a porch with her, and she was just like spraying, and I was like, oh God, what's going on? My daughter. She's only one, but she's having a medical rash, and it's driving my wife crazy because she's just sitting there spraying.
Okay. My daughter's having that.
Like somebody.
Request control. Oh, okay. Yes.
I know, I saw that. They can force it.
Yes. They don't share their screen. I didn't realize it.
How much time would all have had to get Nyla? Do you remember? I just told her she's old enough and big enough.
Yeah, I don't know what you need to extra goes in part of your break.
Yeah, I don't know what to do.
So which, when you say the public recording, you mean YouTube? I had okay. Okay, no, you are still sharing. It does say Illinois on the bottom corner. It does say Illinois. Yep. I didn't see that on the big screen.
Problem wasn't. Has nothing to do with food. Learning that they fill them every day. That's the way to do kind of getting blurry. I'm just going to ask someone to unshare. Oh. Well, we're out of time. Yeah.
Thank you all for that. Before we start on the next item, Cindy Ginther and texted Bill, and I'd like to read a statement from the last item we discussed.
Yeah. Okay. The statement says, from Cindy Genter, had my hand raised, but maybe you didn't see it. Wanted to say, I think staff has researched the modified buffer and made good recommendations. I support their recommendations and agree we might add a visual to the ordinance. Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy. I would recommend for me, I didn't see it obviously, but yeah, Cindy, you better come, put your picture on and I'll see you. But
Maybe somebody has accidentally shared their screen and that might be why they're not seeing hands being raised.
if all of our members on teams could check their teams and make sure that they're not sharing a screen, I believe unshare if you are sharing, and then we'll go back to the full screen. The share icon looks like a small TV screen with an up arrow. That's the share icon.
It's to the right of the microphone, the mute button.
Thank you, Cindy. There we go. Thank you very much.
Great. That's fixed.
Very good. Next item, review illumination of the county's maximum pier length of 150 feet. You get to do this? Okay, we get a thank you.
For you tonight is task force item number 9, regarding elimination of the maximum pier length. The task force members' specific text request included that in order to construct a pier, one must apply to the NDE and the Army Corps for a license. This application must be reviewed and approved by 7 state and federal agencies, and then it must go under county review at the local level. Then the request goes on to suggest removal of the zoning requirement for pier. The department found that Queen Anne's County and Talbot County both include a 150-foot maximum as part of their regulations. Cecil County includes one that is a 300-foot maximum. Our 2018 comp plan includes the following regarding a strategy to encourage the protection of important aquatic resources. We'll read from that. Submerged aquatic vegetation serves as important food, nursery, and habitat for many species of fish and fowl. In recent times, submerged aquatic vegetation in Kent's tributaries have followed a recurring pattern of abundant beds in some years, followed by severe decline and then full recovery in a few years. Sheltered beds are both an economic and a natural resource. The bottom benthic community provides food for bottom-feeding fish such as yellow perch and spot. Activities such as pier construction and sewage outflow must be limited, and those permitted must be designed to minimize their impacts. So, based on this standard in the past, Kent County has limited pier lengths to 150-foot maximum. Queen Anne's County and Talbot County both have similar provisions. Talbot County reported that they have established their maximum allowable length just a history of people building or asking to build 200 to 300-foot piers that were considered intrusive by Talbot County, so a limit was set on the law. Anecdotally, this seems to be the same situation here in Kent County, although why the exact length of 150 feet was chosen is not known. Perhaps it was to mirror the more restricted surrounding jurisdictions. On this matter, staff recommends the task force consider maintaining the current standard of 150-foot pier length. As a compromise, the task force may wish to consider allowing an administrative variance procedure for applicants to request a percentage increase based on special circumstances that applicants would need to bring forth and prove, such as unusual topography, channel location, or other unique conditions. Thank you.
Task force, any questions? I believe that this should be done more. I mean, 150 seems to be, it's a pretty long dock, in my opinion. In fact, I think we just installed one. However, that 150 feet doesn't really get us quite far enough out to the channel. So I think that we might consider, or I would be in favor of considering, depending on, I like to impede more than 1/4 across the waterway. And I also like to impede upon the channel. But I think we might want to leave that open for certain situations where if it's not impeding on the channel and it's not 1/4 of the way across a water body, then I don't see that it's a big issue to aquatic life. In fact, I think it helps aquatic life from my experience on the water. There's places, shellfish and fish, places to hide, crabs to go on pilings and lay their eggs on barnacles and whatnot and everything else. So I really think that if anything, we ought to increase it maybe to 200 feet and keep in the suggestion of the county to perhaps make it on a case-by-case basis if somebody wants to go further or need it today.
Thank you. Any other comments? Paul, do you have something?
Hi, Joe. Yeah, I'm here. Don't have a whole lot to say about it really, other than the fact that Queen Anne's, I'm not experienced with Talbot, but Queen Anne's does restrict to 150 feet of pier length, but the process to get a variance is a lot easier. It's just one planning commission. I recently did a variance in Queen Anne's County, just south of Chestertown, for about a 300-foot pier, and it basically went through pretty easy. And I've done others right near the town of Chestertown in Kent County that was a replacement of an existing 200-foot pier and was shot down by the Board of Appeals. So it seems that in Kent County, to get a variance to go beyond 150 foot is a pretty arduous task. You really have to prove practical difficulty or hardship, which seems to be, in certain cases almost impossible, which, I mean, I do understand that having a pier with only 3 feet of water at the end of it doesn't seem like much of a hardship, but to somebody that has a sailboat or something like that, a bigger boat that draws water, it is a hardship. And more importantly, it affects the value of the property. And I see a lot of times where there's SAVs, a submerged aquatic vegetation, which is pretty protected. It's very protected. You can't build a platform or anything on it. And if somebody could go out to maybe 170 or 200 feet or so, they could get beyond the SAVs. You could build a straight 6-foot wide pier into SAVs and park your boat up beside it, and you would be disturbing those SAVs, where if you were out a little further, you'd get out beyond those into some deeper water, and you could leave those alone. So to say that a longer pier disrupts the wildlife or the habitat, I don't necessarily think is true. So that's a lot of words for somebody who didn't have anything to say. And
Cindy, do you have a comment or?
Yes, I do. At a minimum, I would support the ability to to request a variance and maybe look a little more favorably upon that, depending on the circumstances of the applicant. I also think that the 150-foot restriction may not be a necessity, and agree with both Buck and Billy that, in fact, we may want to consider extending that as well.
Something I'd like to add is that the town of Chestertown, the town of Betterton do not have minimum pier lengths. They say if it meets all the criteria from the MDE and the Army Corps of Engineers, matter of fact, they don't even have to issue a permit. If you have all your state and federal licenses in place, you can go to work. So that was another part of my request for this, was just to kind of have some continuity throughout the county.
I would support, this is Cindy, I would support Buck's suggestion as well.
Thank you. Any other comments from our audience online? Streaming? How about any of the public comments from the room here? Board group.
Hello, Annie Richards again, Chester River Keeper. So I want to thank Bill Mack for what he recommended, and I stand with that recommendation to leave the minimum length at 150. I think a variance is a very fine alternative so that case by case a dock can be evaluated for its impact, especially because there are so many tributaries on the Chester and other waterways through the county that have very, very tide heights, and I realize that can impact a landowner's ability to recreate in the water. But these docks also impede the public's ability to recreate in the water, and below the mean high tide is public use, and it also provides people with commerce. So the longer a dock is, the more we're interfering with people being able to lay a trout line or to negotiate an oyster lease so that they can endeavor to have aquaculture. When a dock is going, well, I think Buck has a very interesting point about dock length going beyond the SAB beds. The fact is that once piers are there, they will have to be maintained, and the dredging and digging of those pier holes is incredibly destructive to SAB bed habitat. And what I can say is there essentially is no one restoration endeavor that the state of Maryland can put their money towards besides SAB that can be as beneficial. The amount of water clarity benefits that SAB provide our rivers, shoreline resiliency, breaking wave action, a thriving bed of SAB can do more than a riprap of rocks along your shoreline to stop shoreline erosion for a homeowner. The amount of eggs produced and laid within an SAB bed is, unquantifiable compared to an area that just has barren mud or, again, a hardened landscape, not to mention food for wildlife. Obviously, SAB needs shade to grow in the river, and, our waterways are impaired. They're very turbid. Sunlight only penetrates 2 to 3 feet down on the best days. So if there are long piers casting shade throughout the day that is blocking significant sunlight throughout the day in those areas, then those SAB are not going to grow from the shade casting those docks as well. So there are tools that can be guides, and I actually would love to, this is more of a question, I don't know how useful the Virginia Institute of Maritime Science SAB map is for current zoning regulations as they consider where docks go and whether a variance will be allowed. I know that at the state level, there's an interactive SAB map where there are aerial photos of SAB beds taken yearly, and those SABs are ground truthed by volunteers to get species and bed density. Once a bed is established, it's protected for 5 years once it's been identified. So, I would think that the past presence in the last 5 years of a thriving SAB bed near a dock, which should weigh and have merit on whether a dock expansion should be considered and whether a variance should be allowed. That's it. Thanks.
Anyone else?
I'd like to add something to this.
Hold on, we'll turn to the public.
Jen Christensen again. I would need to support the river keeper. I think that you have to take into consideration the amount of knowledge that they have. They continuously are sampling our water. They're looking at the effects of what's happening in King County and on the rivers, on the Sassafras, on the Chester River, and that taking into account what the riverkeeper has put forward in terms of the shading of the SAVs on the river, and particularly when you look at what the planning department itself has put forward and our comprehensive plan, I think you have to, I think what they suggested, having a variance would be adequate, but actually making it in extending the pier length in our text amendment, I think would be detrimental to the health of our water, and we should definitely not include that in any text improvement. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Ford Hall, and I'm the owner of George County Outbasin. And I've been on the Sassafras River for 70 years. And my experience with pier lengths is that, you know, what people are looking for is 6 feet of water, roughly, being low tide. So if a lot is blessed with deep water, and they can get 6 feet of water, 25 or 30 feet, that's where they stop filling the dock. There's no use continuing on at to 100, 150 feet or 300 feet. If the issue, the problem that people run into is they build out 150 feet, or they take sounding and they get out 150 feet and they don't have 6 feet of water, that's when they come in for a variance and want to go further until they can get to the 6 feet of water. So maybe we could, instead of just saying just a flat number, 150 feet, come up with a pier length that would provide them with 6 feet of water at mean low tide, and then that would be the permitted length, whether it's 25 feet or 200 feet, whatever the length is, but maybe set a maximum. I don't know if Cecil County is a little bit too long, but maybe 250 feet or something like that, or 20. Well, Cecil County has the length plus 25% of the waterway, but not to encroach in the channel, some wording like that. But that's really, I think, what people want is they want to get into 6 feet of water and be low tide. So anyway, that's my thought. Thank you. You're welcome.
Any other comments from the public or on the live stream?
I would have to agree with Mr. Ford Hall on that. I don't believe that we're going to get into cases where people are going to. I take care of some pretty nice waterfront properties around here, and we just put in a very nice dock, and we do that. And Mr. Hall's point is very well taken, that people want to get to a certain depth of water. People are not going to be building in this at the cost they cost to build a pier now. They're not going to be taking it out further than they need to take it. That's only common sense. So I think that we have to allow people to get to a certain depth, within reason. Like I said before, within the 25% across the body of water or whatever it might be, as long as we're not causing a hardship for a neighbor or some other activity. I think we need to be able to let people get to a depth, and the proper depth comes before they get to 150 feet. They're not going to go all the way to 150 feet. So I think that's going to sort of self-regulate itself.
But I think the whole purpose here is we currently have 150 feet as the maximum. And I could go along with the recommendation from the planning commission that they could offer a variance to go further if the person doesn't get the deep water. Rather than just say something different, I would just stay with 150 as a max, unless there's other circumstances why you have to apply for a variance. So, you know, I think that would still offer enough flexibility. And I agree, they're not going to go out to 150 if they got water beforehand. I get that, but we were just setting a maximum for, unless you can prove you really need to go further.
I think there's a lot of places in the county on the waterfront where 150 feet doesn't get you to very good water. And I think that's the point that I'm making, is that why create more times that we have to have a variance and make it more difficult when we possibly could just, if it's not a problem, then why do we have to go through a variance process on all this? It's creating way more work for the planning commission and everybody else when nobody's going to go further than they have to anyway, in my opinion. So that's my thought.
I just would say I'd like to support that. I think we should stay, there should be some limit. 150 appears to be good. I don't pretend to be a boat owner, I'm not. So maybe in my future. But at the same time, we should have some way of providing for an increase if it's needed, via a variance or whatever, because there may be other circumstances within that, let's say a 300-foot pier might impinge on something that the neighbors have or something like that. So you need that process, I think, in order to allow other people to, you might say, chime in over what is allowed. If you're asking for extra, if you're asking for 200 or 300 feet, then yeah, go through the variance process. It allows your neighbors, allows everybody to understand what's happening and why you want to do it. It shouldn't be that difficult, but at the same time, yes, it's a process. I think that's needed.
Thank you. Since we had comments up here, I'll let the public a chance to comment again, because there may be statements you want to react to.
Sure, I'm pretty loud, can I just talk from here? No, you have to be on the microphone. Got it.
You have to let me get folks on.
I understand. So I would just like to address the point that, there are many areas on our tributaries that run through this county that 150 feet or 200 feet or 300 feet, if every single person had a dock, any kayaker or boater would not even be able to get around those docks in the channel, because in some areas our navigable channels are 6 to 8 feet. So if those boats, if docks are being extended out that far for private boats to hang in the water, then Langford Creek, both the east and the west fork, 2/3 to 3/4 of the tributary will be taken up by private pier. Buckingham's Wharf, which is an area just north of the Chester River Bridge on the King County side, is a popular kayaking launch location, and the water is about 3 feet until you get to the channel, which is 3/4 of the way across the river, almost to the Queen Anne County side. Between recreational boaters, water skiing, kayakers out on the water. If a dock was allowed to reach that length to get that navigable depth, then it wouldn't be a navigable channel for anyone else to use. And not to mention that's because it's such a long stretch of shallow area that's prime FAD habitat. So, a lot of, I am in full support of variance because there are situations that warrant a longer dock. But to have a much larger carte blanche allowance for people to establish their dock is not taking into account the critical habitat and constantly used navigable waterways that public users who don't own waterfront property. And that will be lost to that dock line.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've got,
Just quickly. I just wanted to say that it was great logic that in almost all cases you can mitigate disputes if you can have a process where a variance has to be asked for, rather than wake up one morning and see some 300-foot dock on the riverfront that you love being built and you didn't know about it, basically. I know that in the process of building a dock, you have to send out notices to the neighbors, but that doesn't mean that that would be heard. And it would also allow for the environmental impact of a dock by the river keepers or other people in the county that are concerned about that could come forward and make a statement about it if there was a process for a variance. At 150 feet, what has been there shouldn't be restricted to 150, but with a variance, I mean, it should be restricted to 150, and the variance should be made so that if people can prove that they need to go out further and there isn't an environmental impact from it, and the neighbors agree with it, they can get their pier length. Thank you.
We have
oh, yes, please. Oh, go ahead, please.
I just have a question with regard to accessibility. What makes the property owner have more weight when it comes to taking their dock out 300 feet versus, say, a recreational boater to that same area of the river? I'm not sure if I'm explaining it properly, but if a property owner is allowed to take their dock out 300 feet, then, like others have said, that restricts access to a recreational kayaker, etc. So what makes the property owner be able to have precedent over someone with public use of the river? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Very good.
If I may, I can answer that. When you buy a waterfront piece of property, it comes with riparian rights. We actually, when we do pier permits, we actually establish those riparian right lines. And it's pretty much, so you have the line that's between you and your neighbor, which is essentially where the property line touches the mean high water line. From that point, it extends out across the tidal water. Sometimes it's perpendicular to the channel, sometimes it's perpendicular to the shoreline. It's an equitable line between both properties. And so where that riparian rights end is where all the restrictions come in from the state, the federal, and the local governments. The feds say it can't be more than 25% of the waterway. They also say it can't encroach the navigational channel. Matter of fact, it has to be about 20 feet from any marked or unmarked channel. It can't be within 150 feet of a federal navigation channel. So that's where the channel word limits are. But like I say, it's basically riparian rights, I guess, is the short answer for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm fairly new to all this, so I appreciate the explanation.
Tom, you have something?
Yeah, and I don't know anything about pier length on water. I'm not going out on water. But I think Fort Hall, and Bill certainly had a good point. Fort Hall's worked on the water for his whole life. I think, you know, if they go out to where they hit 6 feet, then they're going to stop. We're not going to keep spending money just to spend money. The other thing I think we have to look at is the people that purchase these waterfront properties. I would say most of them probably want to make it, but in a pier, and they pay a lot of property taxes. I don't think you know, we can't go out in the channel. There's a lot of other regulations, like, you know, Buck just mentioned. So, I mean, I kind of think that maybe we don't even need a lane. And then on the thing with variances, it seems like in King County, we always make regulations, and then we'll say, we'll just go to the ask for a variance, and then we grant it. Well, why have variances? I mean, that really heavy regulations, but then we never abide by them because we'll just give you a variance.
Well, I hope we will just do variances.
You know, I'm just going by what has happened in a lot of ways, not all the time. But it seems like they give a lot of.
Well, especially, I think that's the public opportunities. That's the benefit is that the public is complaining more than by right, like whatever right. Anyone else? Okay. Staff will review the recording and we'll try to establish some consensus there. The next item is staff suggestion number 14. Consider discussing climate change resilience and the floodplain regulations by potentially requiring base flood elevation plus 3 feet for new projects. This staff suggestion raises the issue of potentially addressing climate change through a specific measure. Currently, Kent County requires that the elevation of the lowest floor of all new or substantially improved structures, including manufactured homes in the floodplain, must be elevated at least 2 feet above the elevation of the 100-year flood. There are a little over 3,000 properties in some area located in the 100-year floodplain. For reference, that's about 13,000 properties in total. Additional freeboard, that's the extra feet above the floodplain, could have the effect of lowering annual premiums for FEMA insurance policyholders. And there are 573 FEMA flood insurance policies in place in Kent County. Our 2018 comp plan includes specific language related to the floodplain under environment. Under a strategy to maintain, enforce, and if necessary, strengthen existing regulations for floodplains and buffers, the comp plan states that Kent County's existing regulations address building, filling, and other disturbances within stream buffers, shoreline cliffs, and floodplains for their flood reduction and habitat protection benefits. The county will keep its floodplain regulations current with standard practice and attain higher levels of protection as appropriate. Local projections currently anticipate sea level rise of 1.5 to 2 feet, along with increased coastal flooding by 2050. I just want to reference the 2016 Kent County Climate Change Adaptation Report prepared by the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy recommended that the planning department explore the feasibility of a 3-foot freeboard requirement for new construction and significant improvements in order to be consistent with federal guidance. The county has also addressed nuisance flooding in its 2019 Kent County Nuisance Flooding Plan, which is used as a model statewide. Very proud of that, although I didn't do that plan, this department is very proud of it. The nuisance flooding plan mentions additional freeboard as a structural tool to reduce flooding. In the staff report, some potential downsides are mentioned, and the financial impacts of increasing the required freeboard are not really fully understood. The 2 reports cited above do not address costs, and certainly there would be increased costs, and they will have an effect on the decision that people make to construct the projects. Staff recommends that the task force consider suggesting additional freeboard as a recommendation, based on the recommendations in the 2016 Kent County Climate Change Adaptation Report and the 2019 Kent County Nuisance Flooding Plan. And comprehensive rezoning would be an appropriate time to make that change. We have in the audience Mr. Mike Biddy, who is our FEMA liaison and floodplain manager. If you have additional questions about this, and he's able to speak to issues you think about.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to make your comments now?
I'm here to react to questions only, so if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to speak to it.
Task force, any thoughts on this?
I think now would be a good time to have a picture of what we're talking about. I'll be honest, I don't know where 2 feet with how that would affect the county, and if you go for another foot, what is that going to, what is it going to do?
So freeboard is basically the distance between the ground and the lowest flood.
You're going to be showing the people.
Oh, yeah, sorry, this is Mike Bidding. I'm the Chief Enforcement Officer for Kent County. So basically, freeboard is, if you look at your crawl space in your house. your freeboard is the lowest floor elevation that's there. That includes all your mechanicals and everything like that. In a floodplain, what they do for new construction, or if you're doing something like substantial improvement, you're renovating your whole house, is they require you to, if you're, say, renovating or building a new one, you have to build 3 feet above what the 100-year flood level is. Right now, we have it at 2 feet, and that includes everything like your mechanicals, any electrical, well pumps, things like that, all have to be elevated. Right now, it's 2 feet. The adaptation records everything that we're seeing, says that this could have a substantial, basically a benefit in case of nuisance flooding, a hurricane, anything like that. You're basically, for any new construction or substantial improvement, you're preventing a whole lot of loss that, otherwise, you might have if you didn't, hit this 3-foot requirement.
Mike,
Yes.
isn't, to kind of put it in sort of more layman terms, isn't it basically an extra course of blocks?
Yes, it's an extra cinder block foundation.
If you can visualize what that would be.
No, I can visualize. I was just wondering if there was some kind of map somewhere for the critical area.
Yeah, there's a map, it's mdfloodmaps.net that shows basically all of the 100-year flood lines throughout the county.
So it would be 2 feet above that.
It would be 3 feet above that. Currently it's 2 feet. And this is something that it comes up, not super frequently in the county, but it's something that would prevent, further loss in the case of catastrophic flood or nuisance flooding, based on tide, community safety, all that stuff.
I was just curious if there was a method to show the spray or the way you could
I believe FEMA has a website out there that has a lot of tools to show the different sort of freeboards and the tools that are on that website. So that's something that I can look into afterwards and provide to the task force.
Maybe forward a link or something.
I mean, I think a lot of it is, as Mike explained, based on the ground elevation. So the floodplain has different areas, and it might have to be like elevation 7 or elevation 8. And so then the surveyor takes the ground elevation measurement, maybe that's 3, but the flood elevation is 7.
It's very difficult to visualize if you're on a construction site. If you go out there and you look, you would think, some houses, you're walking on normal dry ground, but if you're above that 2-foot flood level, the houses can be, as high as you, basically. And it's all based on how a surveyor documents that.
Are we talking about just in the floodplain, this rise from 2 feet to 3 feet?
Yes.
That's what we're proposing?
Just in the floodplain.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah, I mean, the sea level's definitely rising. I mean, if you go anywhere south of here, Dorchester County or any place like that, you can see it. So, I mean, I'm all for preventing a catastrophic loss if we can.
I remember when Isabel came and down in Rock Hall, there was a lot of houses had to be redone. And I happened to be on the planning commission at the time. And they were coming in and they were showing us pictures of what happened to their homes when the flooding came in. And then when they rebuilt, they went up, I guess it was 2 feet then.
Yeah.
I think we need to be able to prevent that. And when we have south winds and the water comes up in higher than it used to, even here in Chestertown.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
No problem.
Consensus. Let's James together. You all right?
Keep going, man.
I'm back.
You're saying that in some kind of way they can determine the height of the foundation?
Yeah, it's determined by a surveyor when you're building a new structure or if you're substantially improving.
Okay. The surveyor is determining where the flood level is?
Yes.
And then he's gonna go up another course?
And then he would add an additional 3 feet, based 3 feet above wherever the base flood level is.
That's 2 courses. 16 8-inch block, 8-inch block, that's 16 block, that's 18 inches.
Well,
like that, that's what you're saying?
Well, what we're saying is that they would establish where the base flood elevation is, And currently, right now, you're required to build 2 feet above that. So when we're talking about visualizing, it's mostly just, putting it in layman's terms that, instead of 2 cinder blocks, it's 3 cinder blocks. So you're already required to 2 feet. So we're saying the actual additional requirement when you're visualizing it is really, it's only 1 more cinder block up.
Okay. I got it, Scott. Yeah, thank you, sir.
No problem.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments on that issue? Guess, right now, I'll ask for the task force, any further comments on today's or other activities that, have been from past meetings we want to bring up now, any subjects that we've already discussed, including today, and maybe one.
This is Buck. I'm sorry, I had my hand raised for the Sea Rise stuff. I think somebody had asked about where you could find maps or something that showed the Sea Rise vulnerability. There's a really good layer on the Maryland Environmental Resource Land Information Network website, or its acronym is MERLIN. And you can go on there, populate the aerial photo and populate the sea level rise layer, and you can kind of see the areas that get affected the most. Something else I wanted to bring up too, when we were talking about like base flood elevation, when Mike mentioned base flood elevation, that's based on 100-year storms, which are completely different than sea level rise. Sea level rise would be something static that happens every day. The floods are based on 100-year storms was the old term. Now it's like 1% chance or something like that. So base flood elevations and sea level rise are kind of 2 separate entities addressed differently. Like I say, the base flood elevation is based on storm frequency, not a everyday occurrence.
Thank you, Bob. Any comments from the public either online or here?
Thank you. My name is Ford Hall. I'm on Georgetown Outbasin, and of course I have a number of buildings in the floodplain because it's a water-dependent activity. And I agree with the concept of going an additional foot for the finished floor. Of course, the cinder block is only 8 inches high, so you're really talking about 4.5. But anyway, but one of the problems is there's also another regulation that limits the amount of fill that you can put in the floodplain. So in other words, if I'm building a building, I'm going to raise up another foot. I want to fill that foundation and then pour the slab and then build the building. And I think, Carla, isn't the maximum amount of fill in the floodplain, is it 600 cubic feet or?
Well, Mike has to answer that.
Yeah.
He raised his hand, he knows.
Okay.
Can you come up, please?
Well, so I don't know the specific amount of fill that's allowed, but I do know that along with the freeboard requirement, you have requirements for venting so that you're able to let floodwaters freely pass underneath the structure, and that's part of it. So I can understand, I mean, you can't really fill in necessarily a whole foundation underneath the structure when you're building a new structure because you have to be able to let that water move freely along with, any ebb and flow. So I can check in on a specific amount, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
In my case, where I have a water-dependent facility, what I have to do is, running tractors and locking boats inside buildings. You can't do a suspended floor and let the water flow underneath it. You got to fill it, and then pour a concrete slab, and then be able to run the machinery on it. So, as I say, my recollection is there's a limit on how much fill you can put in the floodplain, and I think it's 600 either cubic yards or cubic feet. I can't remember the number, but something like that. So, my point is, if we're going to require people to build up a foot higher, then we ought to increase the number of, the amount of fill that they can put in the floodplain, to accommodate that extra foot of height. So anyway, that's my thought.
I think we need to get some more information.
Yeah.
Hold on a second, wait, just a minute.
I believe this only refers, or is in reference to a new single-family dwelling or residential structure. I think any sort of buildings like you're referring to would just have venting requirements, and not necessarily be required to, raise the entire, storage facility or anything like that.
Okay, well, maybe next time we can get a little more information. Sounds like there's an answer out here. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I was going to tell him. I'm telling him, and put your fill in, when you put something in like that and you want to put a concrete floor in it, and on one side of it, you put a French drain down there to collect all the water so it doesn't go onto the concrete floor. If it goes on the concrete floor, you got to cut joints in the floor. But your best bet is to build a French drain down in block 4, and that'll solve your problem all every day. That's what you have to do. You can bring that fill up to your 4-inch finished floor, and just run that French drain, and then you're okay. Okay, thank you. All right.
Unless there's any other comments, ready to adjourn? Thank you all.